like to welcome everybody on behalf of the Digital Divide, also by various branches, including Hampshire and Dorset branch. We have two fantastic speakers, Kris and Kirsty. And at this stage, I'm going to pass over to them to introduce themselves and to tell us a little bit about them. If you can actually keep your machine muted and possibly put questions in the chat as we go through, and then they can pick them up at various times during the session. Thank you very much, and over to you two.
Great. Would you like to go first, Kirsty?
Not at all, Kris. On you go.
Okay. Well, some of the people this month might recognise me. My name's Kris Gibson. I work at Southampton Sight, which is a local sight loss charity. I work as what they call a sight loss advisor, which kind of means I'm a general dog's body of sight loss. I do whatever's thrown in my direction to help people cope with the adjustments that come along with a visual impairment. I'm severely sight impaired myself, so I like to say I've got about 40 years of experience in the sight loss world. What we try to do at Southampton Sight is more empower people rather than support them. Everybody needs a little bit of support from time to time, but what we truly want to do is give people the tools, give people the tech, give people the advice, whatever it may well be, that they can live independently and move forward with their lives. I always like to say sight loss loss of sight doesn't mean the loss of life. So that's what we try to do, is empower our members to live a fulfilled life as they did before the sight loss.
Great. Thank you very much, Kris. Yes, hello, everybody. My name is Kirsty McIntosh. I am the head of partnerships for the Scottish Tech Army, which is a not-for-profit that started during the lockdown, the original lockdown. And what we do is bring skilled volunteers with fantastic tech skills to help charities who really need the help to go digital. They're often challenged by a lack of money, a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding, for example, on their boards, and this is a way of addressing that need. As well as my day job as the head of partnerships for the Scottish Tech Army, I'm also the chair of a visual impairment charity called Seascape, which is based in Fife in Scotland. And I've recently become the patron of an art therapy charity called the Teapot Trust, just as an aside. Nothing to do with technology, but there you go. Well, it does actually have a bit to do with technology. I'll maybe tell you that later on. What we're proposing to do today is not really go through some enormous, great big presentation, but I will give you a little bit of an introduction into my organisation, because it has a story to tell about a visual impairment tool called Soundscape, which we launched at the end of last month. But more importantly, my experience within my role at Seascape, but also my role at the Scottish Tech Army, is that the visually impaired in this country and abroad have really learned to embrace technology as an empowering tool that gives them independence and confidence in their ability to exercise their human rights, if you like, as citizens of this country. And it's very easy for us to sort of assume that they need extra help and stuff like that. But actually, the organizations that support and empower these people actually have kind of pretty much almost got it down pat in terms of how they can encourage people to take up technology. And I think there is a great deal to be learned from what's going on in the sight loss community around how you get people to adopt technology and how we might be able to take those lessons and apply them elsewhere. And I think that's, the main part of today's really is just a conversation between Kris and I. I'll be asking him a bunch of questions about how they go about doing what they do. Very, very welcome to take all of your questions in the channel, and really it's really more of a deep dive, I suppose, into how the sight loss community has I think it would be fair to say, Kris, that just about every sight loss organisation regionally around the country has an assistive tech specialist working or volunteering within their organisation. Assistive technology is a huge part of the lives of people who've experienced sight loss. Whether it's a guide dog or a white stick or whatever it is, there's a whole load of accompanying technology that can help. And as Freddie quite rightly pointed out in his announcement about this event, 30%, is it only 30% of people of working age with sight loss are in employment?
Yes, it's 7 out of 10, sorry, of working age or unemployed.
Yeah. And it's not because they don't want to work, and it's not because they can't work. It's just because something somewhere isn't quite right there. And it would be really nice to be able to explore some of the things that perhaps we as businesses can do to address that as well. So if it's okay with you guys, I will start with just a quick introduction to the Scottish Tech Army and what it's all about. I will try and share my screen successfully during rehearsals. This did not go well, and I know I'm the techie in the room, but it's embarrassing nevertheless. So I will.
I feel your pain.
I know I should know better, frankly. So,
That looks good.
Sorry. You can see that, no problem at all. Okay, so the Scottish Tech Army, as I said, is a not-for-profit that started during the first lockdown in 2020. It was literally an organisation that sprung up in the course of 3 weeks from inception to launch, and I was volunteer number 3, somewhat unexpectedly. I didn't know that, but it literally popped up on my LinkedIn feed, and I had spent about 5 years working for a tech business before I'd started my own consultancy, which I'd had to shelve, during the pandemic, and it presented an amazing opportunity for me to now do what I'm doing. In the last 3.5 years, we have registered more than 3,000 volunteers, and I would say that around about 1,100 of those have actually worked actively on projects for around about 300 organisations. We do everything from helping people with their websites to, during the pandemic, it was simple things like how do we use Zoom or Teams? How do we switch a digital fundraising tool on our website because nobody can do tray bakes and sponsored walks anymore? I mean, there were all sorts of challenges that we were addressing at the time. But we realised after about 6 or 7 months that there was a real need for digital assistance in the sector. The third sector is really hamstrung by a lack of funding, a lack of resources, a lack of time because they're just trying to do what they do, a lack of knowledge on their boards. So I would encourage anybody with a tech background to please think about becoming a trustee. But we realised that actually, the pandemic was just shining a light on a long-term problem. So we have now sort of transitioned to become an organisation with a far broader remit, shall we say. One of the things that we did last year was launch the Tech for Good Alliance, which is a framework to engage with corporates and businesses who allow their staff volunteering time. We know that sometimes the uptake of that volunteering opportunity is low, and often it's because they're just too busy, but also it's because the opportunities that are being presented to them don't really match the skills that they have. So the Tech for Good Alliance is a way in which we can engage with those CSR programs and really get people using their skills for good. The intention specifically with the Tech for Good Alliance is to identify projects where built once well could be reused over and over again for multiple charities, and really start pushing some digital solutions into the sector that are specifically for them but are not legacy. So one of the challenges the sector has is that a company comes along, it builds a nice bright shiny thing for a charity, they both go their separate ways, and it almost immediately becomes a piece of legacy tech because there's nobody there to support it in the longer term. But also some of that tech is really, really good, and it would be brilliant to share it with multiple organisations, but it's neither the company's responsibility nor the charities to do anything about that. That's not what they're there for. So organisations like mine are kind of setting their sights on what tech is out there that we could potentially repurpose and reuse. And if it's not there, can we build something new that we can actually repurpose and reuse? An example of that actually is the story of Soundscape, which we can touch on later on. We have some really good close relationships with other organisations. The Tech for Good Alliance is match funded, so to become a member of the Tech for Good Alliance as a company, there is an annual fee, and the National Lottery Community Fund match funds that, which is allowing us to scale across the whole of the UK because it is a UK-wide initiative. Obviously, we have a great relationship with BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT, and we have a great relationship with the Data Lab here in Scotland as well, which is Scotland's AI centre, if you like. Go Code Green is an interesting one. I don't know if any of you have heard of it before, but it is a startup, in fact, that has developed a methodology to allow you to calculate the carbon impact of your technology. So it looks at things like your website and any code that you're developing, and basically gives you a little bit of a a boiler rating, I suppose, as to how carbon friendly your technology is. They were longlisted for this year's Earthshot Prize, but sadly didn't make the shortlist last night. So next time I bump into Prince William, I'll have a word. But they're fantastic, and we have an arrangement with them whereby we get them to have a look at some of our tech to make sure that we are doing the right thing by the environment as well as the right thing by our charities. This year we've worked on, this is just a splash picture, but we've worked for around about, I think we've completed about 34 projects this year so far, and they range across the UK, but I would say obviously at the moment there's still quite a lot of them that are in Scotland. But I would also reiterate the fact that much of what we're doing there is reusable, and we will use it with other organisations around the UK. So if you are engaged with the third sector, please tell them that we exist. We do not charge charities for our services at all. That's not what we're for. Our funding comes from elsewhere, and we're very much here to help. And I would have to say to you that our volunteer numbers have never dropped. We've never lost people coming forward wanting to help. And I don't think that will actually change anytime soon. Sorry, I don't know what happened to my screen there. The story of Soundscape, I will get into a little bit later on after we've spoken to Kris, but it is a spatial audio navigation app that was developed through Microsoft Research. And it had the plug pulled on it at the end of last year, but the output was made open source. So we've reinstated it and we switched our version on just before Microsoft switched off their service at the end of August. But it's a great story of the collaborative effort of the organisations that we work with and the volunteers that come forward. But it's also an absolutely fantastic example of great tech for the visually impaired sector, which Kris, I'm sure, would second. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour around the Scottish Tech Army and things like that. So I'll stop sharing my screen and we'll get going. Freddie, it's great to see you. How are you?
Hello, everyone.
Oh,
hello, everybody. Apologies. Some personal challenges. I hope you can understand. I'm okay now. Welcome to this webinar. I just want to check that have we started already, or you're waiting for me to start?
Yes, we have started, and we are
okay. So please continue, okay? And then I'll join towards the end when we do a Q&A. Yeah. So please continue.
Okay. Thanks, Freddie. So as I said to everybody, this is really a conversation between sort of Kris and I, and the hope here is that we can sort of tease out some of the ways in which the site support organisations around this country engage with their customers and their clients, and get them encouraged to use technology, and then perhaps a chat about some of the obstacles and how they're overcome, and then maybe a broader conversation around how we take some of those lessons and seek to apply them elsewhere. So I suppose first of all, Kris, it's really good to see you again. Thank you very much. Indeed.
More than happy to be here.
Good stuff. I wondered if you could give us a bit of a description of your day job. I mean, I know that you very kind of self-deprecatingly said that you were kind of the dog's body of the visually impaired world, but perhaps you could give me a bit about how you go about your job and the kind of people that are referred to your organisation, in terms of everything from their age range to why they're experiencing sight loss.
I mean, I guess our age range literally is from 0 to up to about 102, but generationally, we do tend to skew towards the older age range for obvious reasons. A lot of sight loss, particularly age-related macular degeneration, as the name implies, does come on later in life. So we do tend to see older people, but that's not to say that we don't have our fair share of youngsters as well. The youngsters certainly are far more up-to-date with the tech than the older generations. The older generations tend to be not suspicious of tech, but more suspicious of their abilities to use tech. So one of the first hurdles to get over is to get people comfortable with the very basics, how to use, for example, a smartphone. Something that seems very obvious and very intuitive to somebody with sight can actually be quite daunting and quite a difficult challenge for somebody who can barely see the screen. So my first role is usually just to try and make people feel more comfortable in themselves and in their new life, as I like to call it. A lot of what we do is taking what people's life was. A lot of people are afraid that what they used to do, they will no longer be able to do. So my initial job is to try and show them that what was can still be. So it's not a question of if, it's more a question of how. You know, we have people with a wide range of interests, whether it's very everyday, like reading, for example, or we have one of our young VIs wanted to take up snowboarding recently, for example. So, you know, when I say I'm a general dog's body, what I mean by that is we are a person-centered, needs-led organization. So if somebody comes to me with an issue, with a desire to either continue with an interest, or in that case, take up a new interest, I try and facilitate that, whether directly by sitting down and going through technology and trying to talk them through the difficulties of setting up an iPhone direct from a box, for example, which is often the hardest and most difficult challenge for most people, to signposting them to other organizations who can help them achieve what it is they're looking for. So as far as tech is concerned, it really, on the everyday, I do see a very much a generational divide. The young certainly have been born and raised with the internet, with smartphones, with smart technology. So the leap from using an iPhone as is to using one with voiceover, for example, with, you know, smart invert on these things, they're already pretty much along that path. If anything, they could probably teach me a thing or two. The difficulty for me is getting people of an older generation who maybe haven't grown up with a laptop in the corner of the room, who see technology as a barrier more than a tool. It's really trying to remove those barriers, remove those hurdles, and remove, you know, what's stopping them in the first place, which is fear of the unknown. Often, again, with sight loss, you tend to lose a lot of agency. You tend to have a lot of things done for you. You tend to rely on a lot of other people. And that's okay. We often say, you know, you have to give up some independence to remain independent. We all need help, regardless of the impairment. But what tech can do is give back that agency. Soundscape is a fantastic example of this because, as I think we were talking before we started, you know, as somebody who's visually impaired, I can use a white cane. I can go to familiar areas. I've been taken out by a rehabilitation officer. I've been shown routes that I use on an everyday basis. So I can walk from my office here in Southampton to where I live, which is about an hour and a quarter's walk away. So it's not an insignificant walk. And I can do that completely unaided with my white cane. However, if I suddenly decide halfway home, I want to go for a cup of coffee at Costa or Starbucks or wherever, no sponsorship here, I can't simply just walk off my beaten path. The second I take a right or a left for what I know, I'm back in that unfamiliar environment. And even with, even in my job, even though the confidence I built up over time, I still find myself at a complete loss at those moments. What Soundscape and other apps have allowed me to do is to give me back that agency, to give me back that spontaneity. If I decide I do want to take a left, take a right, I know that the app not only tells me where I am, not only gives me the markers as to what's around me, but it also gives me an audible feedback. So I know that my ultimate destination, if you like, is at the end of the heartbeat or whatever sound I've picked on the app. I know where I am. I can orientate myself by both. So this, again, gives me back some agency. Apps such as Seeing AI or Envision AI on the Android, they have text-to-speech capabilities. I remember years ago being frustrated when a letter would be pushed through the letterbox, and I'd want to be able to read it, but taking it out the envelope, I couldn't see the words. It would take, you know, I'd have to wait until my wife got home from work, for example. And it sounds like a small thing, but these little frustrations do eat away at your self-esteem. Being able to take a letter out of an envelope, hold up my phone to it, and have the phone read the letter to me instantaneously just gives me back that sense of self-control, of self-reliance and independence. It gives back confidence that is often too easily lost.
I think that's really interesting, actually, that especially that last point that you make there, Kris, about that, privacy. I mean, I remember our head of assistive technology, who was completely blind, saying that, Seeing AI had, he'd read a letter from his cardiologist for the first time in private in his whole life, and he's in his mid-30s.
Yes.
And he didn't have to have his mother read it to him, and it made such an enormous difference to his sense of dignity. I just think I found that really, really moving. I was very struck by how many things we take for granted, when we have, full use of our eyes. It's very interesting.
It's those little things. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I run a young VI group, as I call it. So we meet once a month. We meet in a social, we go out into Southampton city centre, because they want to feel that they're normal, in quotes. They want to feel that they're doing what their peers are doing. The others in their 20s, they want to go to a restaurant, they want to go to a bar, but we encourage that independence. And they can use WhatsApp by having voiceover on, by using the dictation options. They can find where the restaurant is by using Soundscape or Google Maps, whatever it may well be. It allows them to do things when they want to do them, which is something we all, when we can see, take very much for granted. We don't even think about it. But for somebody in their 20s who's maybe got very limited sight or no sight at all, giving you that freedom to just choose when you want to do it, how you want to do it, is incredibly liberating and empowering. And that's the beauty of all tech, I feel.
Absolutely. So when it comes to some of the people that are referred to you, I know that there's a bit of sensitivity around I'm not blind, I'm just my sight isn't very good. And so you've got that kind of initial sort of there's nothing wrong with me, I don't need help kind of thing. How do you go about getting them to the place where actually accepting the need for some kind of additional sort of tools is required? I mean, even to the extent of things like, we have at Seascape, we have our site support workers. They go into people's homes and they help them to kind of mitigate the possibilities of bumping into things. And I think that I've done a couple of those visits, and I'm always very struck by how much the person's kind of trying to con you that they're okay, and it's because they are so familiar with their environment that they kind of try to kind of kid you into thinking that you're that they know exactly what it is that you're doing, and you're just kind of thinking, well, good, if somebody moved that chair, that would be you'd be over
absolutely
in a second.
Yes.
So how do you get them to the point where it's okay to say, right, I think I might need some extra help?
For me, I guess this is partly why I was given the position and the job I have. I guess I have that special secret ingredient, which is I am actually severely sight impaired myself. Often I sit with somebody, I'm the first person they've ever spoken to who has experienced something similar to what they have experienced. Obviously, everybody is different. It's a cliche, but sight loss is on a spectrum. Some people have far better vision and far less vision. It's one extreme to the other. But to sit with somebody who's been there, done that for 40 years. My vision, I was born with relatively normal sight. I have a condition called retinitis pigmentosa. I started noticing things were going awry about age of 8 or 9. And since then, it's degenerated to the point where I'm at now, where they guesstimate I've got about 3% eyesight. Not quite sure where they come up with that very specific number, but so my vision has, each year the goalposts have moved, and I've had to learn to adapt with that. And it's not always been easy. I've struggled in my own life. I have been isolated. I've been alienated. I've been sat at home while my wife has gone out to work to put food on the table, and I've twiddled my thumbs for 12 hours, not speaking to a single soul because I was too afraid to leave the house. So to be able to sit with somebody and give your own personal experience of what you've been through, and to show them how much your life has moved forward, that's the first step. I always say as well, you have to go at your own speed. I could sing the praises of white canes, smartphones, electronic magnifiers until the cows come home. But until somebody is willing or prepared to take that first step, all I can do is encourage. So I don't push, I lead by example. I certainly, from my own personal experience, a white cane is a great example. I struggled with the idea of using one for many, many years. I did not want to be that person. I didn't want to walk out the house and be that blind man on the street. You know, I felt vulnerable. I felt like I'd be a target. And I felt it was giving too much of myself away to the public. You know, it's quite a big thing to announce to the world that you are this blind person, if you like, in your community. So I did not want to use a white cane for the majority of my adult life. It was only in the last 5-6 years that I started using one. And it was quite an emotional hurdle to get over. Having gone on the other side of that, I can now say I don't go anywhere without either my white cane or my symbol cane, partly because I want to tell the world that I can't see, because it makes life so much easier. You know, there's this fear that the world is a cruel place and everybody is quite mean at times, but my reality is very much different. I would say 99% of people are very kind. So just showing the world that you do have this difference, that you might need a little bit of help, actually has been a massive benefit to me. And that has progressed me onto the tech side of things. I didn't even use a smartphone until 2018. I think I got my first iPhone because I simply thought I couldn't use it. Somebody turned on voiceover and within 10 minutes I was texting, I was sending emails. You know, it literally was that quick for me. I'd grown up using computers, so I was already relatively tech-minded anyway, but it was just getting over that initial fear of the unknown, that unfamiliarity. I can sit with somebody and I literally just tell them my life story. To a point. I hope I don't bore them to tears. But I think a lot of people feel they're alone. They're the only person who's going through what they're going through. Sight loss, like many disabilities, is very much a hidden disability. It can be very isolating. And a lot of people don't wish to advertise to the world. So you might pass somebody in the street who's sight impaired and not even know it because they don't want to have to acknowledge it. So it can, in that sense, be quite alienating. All I try and do is have that conversation. Once you get somebody talking, once you start showing them that they're not alone, that other people are going through this, and there is help, and it's not just support, it's empowerment that we really try and push. As I've said before, you show them a few little tricks of the trade, if you like, a few little life hacks. You show them that they don't have to struggle to read the letter anymore. They've got an electronic magnifier, or here's an app on a phone, or, you know, whatever it may well be. It's baby steps, but once that door is open just a little bit, most people cannot wait to run through it. It sounds like a bit of a cliche or a pun, but it really is eye-opening to most people. And they find that they get their life back. And that's all anybody wants, is agency and independence.
I think for me, and I'd love to hear comments from other people about this as well, is that's the crucial thing for me. So when we're talking about trying to engage people with technology, you know, for agency in their daily lives, irrespective of whether they have a disability or not, those who are digitally disengaged, for want of a better way to put it, if you put aside those who can't get to the technology for whatever reason, but, you know, and look instead at the ones who could but choose not to for whatever reason, is we're often telling them that they have to get digitally connected because somebody else wants them to do it. And it's not because it actually makes a difference to their daily lives. It's like, you have to do this because the government's changed all of its services to be digital only. So, you know, you change your life because the government chose to do this, instead of somehow turning that around and saying, if
Absolutely.
you did this, you look at all these things that, you know, look at what, you know, what life could be like, you know, how different things could be for you, you get to choose, you get to decide, you know, on certain things and things like that. And I think for me, that's one of the real lessons, is that people embrace technology, or people start using technology in the visually impaired community because in some ways they almost don't have a choice, that they're coming because they need the help. They didn't maybe think that technology would be the solution, but they've come for help and they know they need something. So they're coming with that kind of attitude almost in mind. It's like kind of going, something here is going to make a difference to me. It matters to me that this difference is made. And I think we're not very good at that outside of these worlds. I think we just make an assumption that, well, you know, we're closing all the post offices, so you'll just have to go online. Instead of actually potentially sort of possibly turning that argument around and making it a bit more personal.
No, you're right. I mean, a lot of the clients I see, you know, they come to me out of necessity, and often You know, it's a partner, it's a wife, it's a husband, it's a brother or a sister who's brought them along, because they don't want to see themselves as that disabled person. There's such a stigma. I mean, this is why they changed the certification from being registered blind to severely sight impaired, because the word blind has such negative connotations. Nobody wants to be that person. What I try and do is flip that. I talk to them, I explain, you know, what is available, but I try and find one thing that they're interested in that maybe they're struggling with. And I find that one bit of tech or that one app that can help make that activity, whatever it may be, that little bit easier. And once you've hooked them with that little bit, once you've shown them, even if it's just Audible, for example, you know, that somebody who loves to read, but they've not been able to read from a book for whatever reason, they don't want to use a magnifier, whether electronic or manual. I can get them onto Audible, listening to an Audible book. You know, it's brought to life by someone like Stephen Fry or some great, fantastic actor who takes one of their favorite books and brings it to life. Suddenly they've gotten joy from that technology. It's no longer a crux. It's no longer something they've had to adopt or they've been forced to adopt. It's something that opens up that world to them again. And once you show them that one angle in, the rest, really, it all follows from there.
Yeah, I think, again, another story from Stuart, and forgive me, I may have told this the last time we were on this call, but he told me the story of a lady who, I think she had a Nokia 5110 by the sound of things. Whatever mobile phone she was using, she'd had for a very, very long time. You know, her visual impairment meant that really she needed to sort of move on. And it was a big change for her, and she was very, very resistant to it. And all she ever used to do with her phone was phone her family. Yeah, that was about the extent of it. But beyond that, she was actually very isolated. Anyway, so Stuart managed to identify the right kind of phone for her that had the right buttons and everything that she would sort of need. But then he sort of also showed her some of the other amazing bits of technology that was available to her on this particular phone. And she completely embraced it. And she ended up buying a couple of Google Nests and sort of doing the whole digital voice assistant thing and listening to the news and the Archers and, you know, calling her friends and speaking to family and things like that. And she was 104. I mean, she, you know, it's just like kind of going, this just made, but basically it kept her at home. It kept her in her own home in a familiar place. Her family benefited from not constantly having to worry about her being lonely and all this kind of thing as well. And I think that was also, it's that knock-on effect, the ripple effect of being able to embrace some of this stuff, you know, and the ripple effect it has on your social circle as well. And I think that's sometimes the case as well. I mean, I think peer pressure is the wrong word, I suppose. Peer examples, I think, are probably something that we also need to look at. I remember saying, Freddie, you may remember this. I don't know if you were on that call, but ages ago when the Digital Poverty Alliance first started up during lockdown, I remember somebody asking the question is, how do we get older people to embrace technology? And I said, well, when was the last time you watched a soap opera where anybody over the age of about 18 was using a piece of technology on the television screen in front of you? How do you don't see Dot Cotton, I know she's passed away now, but you don't see Dot Cotton doing her banking on her mobile app, you know, and actually the reality is that this is how we engage in daily life, or this is how we're going to have to engage in daily life. And if you don't see it in examples like soap operas, and I know if people might be going, what the hell am I talking about? But I remember I'm ancient, but I remember EastEnders being the first soap opera to talk about heroin addiction, to talk about AIDS and all this kind of stuff. That is how this country learns about some of the things that are going on in its world. And actually, if we don't use it positively rather than it just being a kind of propaganda tool, then that's such a wasted opportunity. So I do think that's another way of actually sort of trying to cross that digital gap and say there's a whole hell of a lot of things in it for you. If you're engaged there. And it doesn't have to be the cesspit of social media. There are so many other things that you can be doing with technology, learning and everything else as well. It can be so many other things as well.
Yes, absolutely. There's often a sense that, oh, technology is great, but it's not for me. You know, I'm beyond a certain age. Old dogs, new tricks. You know, every cliche under the sun. But if you can find that one joy, that one love that the person has that they're struggling with, and you can turn it around with just a little bit of tech. It may be an app, it may be just a magnifier with a light. But if you could get them engaged again, get them doing what they love, they will start to see technology as not something to be feared, but something to be embraced. And that's when their life really starts to take off again. And you're absolutely right. The ripple effect is enormous. We can never underestimate the impact that sight loss has on those around us. You know, I know from my own experience with my wife and my family, the impact that visual impairment has on me doesn't just stop at me. You know, it ripples out to my partner, to my friends, to my family, to my social groups, you know, you name it, everybody. The happier I am and the more independent, the more self-reliant I am, the happier and more self-reliant everybody around me is. The less they worry, the less they have to take up that slack, if you like. So technology isn't just for the individual. It is, because it's empowering, but it just has such an impact on everybody around you.
Absolutely. I think actually Soundscape's an interesting example of this, where I've been very struck by the way the community has spoken about Soundscape, and you know, some of the forums where we announced that this app was back in operation, and the reaction from people, and some of the storytelling and sharing that's been going on there as well, is it's a thing in common, but it's a positive thing in common rather than a negative thing in common. And I think again that's something else that is to be applauded, you know, and also, you know, potentially shared with other sectors around this. You know, how do you make the embracing of technology something that is a positive experience? One of the charities that we supported, actually, we didn't support her, she supported us. Sorry, I'll turn that around. We came across a charity called Thriving Survivors here in Scotland, which is a charity that supports survivors of abuse. And she did this amazing thing where during lockdown, it was a peer support organisation. So she knew immediately lockdown was announced that this actually had carried a potential threat, a serious threat to the people that she was trying to support. To the extent that she didn't expect some of them to survive, you know, that isolation, because they really needed to be able to talk to each other. And what she did is she basically got hold of some funding to buy devices for the people within the support group. I think they were Samsung tablets or Samsung mobile phones. She provisioned and configured them herself. She gave everybody a Gmail account. She gave everybody access to Google Hangout, which was the kind of the chat thing that was kind of going on. And she literally wrote the instructions that said, like literally, as soon as you open the box, it said, this is what's in the box. This is what it's going to look like when you press this button. This is what's going to show up on the screen. And it literally was a walkthrough process to that. But she said that because she did it that way, they embraced the technology very, very quickly. And actually, Google Hangouts has become an enormous part of her organization. She said it's not just a case of, you know, hanging out and talking to each other. They've now got Hangouts for cookery and gardening and you know, things outside of their standard sort of peer support network. So it's about finding that thing, isn't it? It's about finding that one thing that everybody can maybe have in common, and a reason to embrace technology because it's important to them and it makes a difference to their daily lives. I think there's a lot that we can take from the way the sector engages that way. It's great.
It's that breakdown of the unfamiliar. You know, if I went into an Apple store and bought an iPhone straight out of the box, first time, I wouldn't stand a chance. You know, out of the box, it doesn't have smart invert on. It doesn't have voiceover on. Now, there are ways and means I appreciate from the initial setup, but you have to be in the know to know how to get voiceover from the off as you're setting up the phone. That in itself can be enough to put somebody off. And once they've had one negative experience, they're very unlikely to want to go back. So again, mine is to demystify technology, to make it seem for what it is. It's a tool, it's a benefit, it's a joy to be had. You have to break down that barrier and get rid of the mystery in that sense. I think Soundscape is fantastic in the sense that it has a cool factor. I know from the young VIs that I deal with, the fact that it's very futuristic in a sense. It doesn't feel like it's utilitarian. You know, an app can sometimes feel that all it is it's a sledgehammer to break a walnut, if you like. It does one thing and it does it very well, but it's very rudimentary. It's almost like modernist architecture or something. Whereas Soundscape has that very cool factor. It has that very, I want to say tactile. I mean, it's an audible device, but the way it reacts to the person, the way it's very you hold it up, you use it almost like a metal detector. It can point you towards where you want to go. As much as it's telling you 50 meters to your right, it's also giving you the almost the sonar feedback. To a young person, something along those lines, it makes them feel like they are ahead of the curve, if you like. They're on the cutting edge. They're not just somebody who's having to use a phone because they don't have a choice. They're choosing to use it because it feels relevant, and now it makes them feel part of the now society. We all want to be a part of what's going on. We never want to feel outside of it. So yes, breaking down the mystique, but also making something desirable, I think, is also a great way to engage people.
Absolutely. And I think also the flip side of this is how you debunk the myth that blind people would find it hard to work. So I think the education actually has to happen to those with vision, and say to them, actually, this is how blind people or visually impaired people engage with technology in their daily lives, and this is how it works, or it could work at work. And there is not some enormous burden and terrible worry that you have that they might not be able to find the right bus to come to work. I think there's a real ignorance level there about the independence that people with visual impairment have. So I certainly think that there are we could probably flip an awful lot of what you teach, Kris, and to teach people with vision, to say, actually, this is how this stuff works. Stick a blindfold on if need be, and
we do.
Let's show you how it does. Exactly. Let's show you how it can go. Okay, well, very quickly, so we're coming up on quarter two. I will just give a very quick 2 minutes about how Soundscape came about specifically, and then I'll let everybody kind of listen to what Kris is talking about there. And I get what you mean by ASMR, about being tactile. It's because you hear it, particularly if you're using bone conducting headphones. It does resonate, and also with your emotion as well. I think it's definitely that kind of ASMR sort of sensation that you get with the app, and it's kind of, it becomes a part of you, I suppose. Is when you're using
very user friendly. Yes, very naturalistic.
Is that
Christy,
okay,
would you
Margaret?
like to share screen so we can hear it?
Yes.
And
I
also
will.
in the chat, Kris gave a talk in August, and the link to it, which was recorded, is actually in the chat at the start of the chat.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I will very quickly tell you a very quick story. I'm just going to bounce through these slides till we get to the one that you can listen to. So can you see here's the thing?
Yes.
Okay, so very quickly, Soundscape was a Microsoft research project which ran for nearly 7 years, and it was an idea that came from a gentleman called Amos Miller, who worked for Microsoft, who lost his sight while he was working for Microsoft. And what he wanted was to be able to use spatial audio to create a navigation tool that would allow somebody with visual impairment to navigate around. But they decided towards the end of last year that they would shut it down. They'd concluded their research, they'd learned everything they needed to know from it, and that they were going to remove it from the App Store at the end of 2022. They'd never marketed it, it was never a product, but nevertheless, there had been nearly 35,000 downloads of the app globally in the course of the probably 5 years since it was made available in the App Store. And then pulling it really didn't go down very well. There was a petition started in the US to try to stop or ask Microsoft not to continue with it anymore. There was a lot of bad feeling around. There were lots of very serious conversations going on about why Microsoft was doing this terrible thing. But at the end of the day, it was a research project, and they'd never pretended that it was anything else. But what they did do is they made all of those years of research available as open source. And the code for Soundscape was sitting in Microsoft's GitHub repo from the end of last year. Those who already had the app were going to lose the service at the end of August. We found out about it at the Scottish Tech Army found out about it at our Tech for Good Summit on the 20th of April this year. And that was because my charity, Seascape, had tweeted the petition while I was sitting next to the head of social impact from Microsoft, which was a slightly uncomfortable 30 seconds. Managed to work out that it was open source. And the day after the summit, PwC, the consulting firm, got in touch with us to say that they were very interested in what we'd been talking about at the summit. They'd been guests of ours on the day. And one of the teams, the cloud engineering team, wanted to know if there was something that they could do with their skills for their National Volunteering Day on the 19th of May. And I said to them, well, actually, yes, you can. You can go and have a look at the Soundscape repo and tell me if this is an app that we can reinstate, because everything I'm reading tells me that the community doesn't want to lose it. And that's absolutely exactly what PwC did. We had a cloud engineering team in Edinburgh looking at how you connected the various bits of tech together, because Microsoft had withheld some of it because it was proprietary code, which was fine. It was just a case of what had to replace it. We also had a product management team down in London from PwC working with guide dogs and some other users of the Soundscape app to understand what worked about it, what didn't, and what would make it better in the future, and came up with the start of a potential roadmap of improvements. And as a result of that day and the work that PwC did, it really gave us confidence that actually we can reinstate this app. We will give ourselves the 4 months that we have to the end of August to get this thing up and running again. And we brought together a team of individual volunteers from various different sort of parts of the country. The chap on the top right-hand side there, Tony, he lives in Kazakhstan, but he's actually from Nigeria. We had people down in the southwest of England, the southeast of England, the high north of Scotland. I mean, you name it, they came from everywhere. And we built the back end, we connected it to the front end, which is the bit that everybody sees. We replaced bits of missing code, which was to do with the mapping. We had a raft of testers from around the country, including people from Southampton site who were testing it for us to tell us whether or not it was working properly. We had to develop a new brand identity because obviously we couldn't use Microsoft's. And we also had to go and find some money to cover the initial hosting costs, which we managed to do thanks to a fantastic organization called the Thomas Pocklington Trust. And we launched it with 9 hours to spare. I don't know if you know that, Chris, but we launched it with 9 hours to spare. We switched ours on the morning of the 31st of August before Microsoft turned theirs off at, that night in Seattle. And I have to say, I would like to put my hand up and say that Microsoft have been incredibly supportive of everything that we were trying to do. They were really, really helpful, and they are absolutely delighted that somebody has picked up what they made open source and done something with it. And if you think about the size of the research team and the number of years that was invested, this is, north of probably $15 million worth of research that they have made available for nothing. And it's really fantastic that we've been able to take it and do something with it. So we've been all over. I mean, I've been talking about this for weeks. You'll be sick of the sound of my voice. We've been talking on podcasts. We've been promoting it as much as possible. And our download numbers are looking sort of really good. And the feedback, it really is about, I was terrified of losing this app because it gave me that independence. I didn't want to have to go and learn something new. And one of the challenges that the sector, the visually impaired sector and the disability sector, I think has, is that a lot of technology development is put into the market and then withdrawn because it either can't wash its face financially, or it's a research project, or they've pivoted and they're going to target a different sector instead. And I think we need to find a way to sort of give that community some kind of agency over when that technology gets pulled. And if it's going to be made open source, organizations like mine, I'm not the only organization, but organizations like mine are the ones that can step in to support and maintain and continuously develop these apps so that they're always available for use. Apple's just brought out their latest iOS, so we're looking at what impact that has for Soundscape as well. So there's a symbiosis, there's a collaboration that can happen here to make this last in the longer term. Now, if I go here, you'll need to turn your volume up so you can actually hear this, but this is what it sounds like when you're using the app, and I'll just play it for about 30 seconds, all right? Start in a moment.
Beacon set on home. Craigswood Gate, 5 meters away, 1 of 2. Home. Craigswood Gate is nearby. Beacon set on Baillieston, Main St Edinburgh Road bus stop, 700 meters away, 2 of 2.
Now, if anybody's using headphones, you may actually hear some of this noise coming out of only one headphone and not the other. And that's because the marker where you're trying to get to is not directly in front of you. It's actually giving you that spatial.
Approaching intersection. Bredisholm Road, goes left. Footpath, continues ahead. Bredisholm Road, goes right.
So it lets you know when you're coming up to a junction.
695 meters.
It sounds great. And the voice, by the way, I will stop it now, but the voice, by the way, is interchangeable. So as I say, one of my colleagues in Scotland has a Scottish lady's voice called Flora. She's the one that navigates him around quite the thing. Stuart actually said, my colleague at Seascape, who's our head of assistive technology, he is blind, he has a guide dog as well. And he said that he was navigating, he actually said it on the television, because we were on the telly last week as well. He said that it had navigated him to a building he'd never been to in the town where he lives. And it literally brought him right up to the front door. And he just said it was fantastic. He just the lady that was filming him, it was really quite funny. The woman that was filming him, she couldn't keep up with him. He was moving that fast down the street. She was struggling to kind of film. Anyway, so that's the story of a single piece of technology that is still available into the visually impaired sector. And I hope we have an opportunity to do more of it. I don't know if anybody's got any questions or anything.
Kirsty, Kris, if I may jump in here. First of all, thank you for doing this webinar, right? I think, what struck me was following Kris, your presentation last month, where, there were lots of interest and also growing understanding of this space. And this is where, Kirsty, you make that connection and say, hey, Freddie, we're doing something here. How can we find a way to get this message out there? And to be frank with you, I'm blown away by what I'm learning today, right? Because this is a space that I know very little about, and I'm sure there are many people like me here who has taken for granted, being an able-bodied person with some skills, we take for granted that there are others who are not in a similar position. So I have a few questions for you. Am I right to say that this is like the Google Maps for the visually impaired? Is that a good way to help people understand this?
I suppose so, but it's more of I think it's actually more like walking with somebody that's constantly talking with you and describing everything that's going on around you at the same time. So yes, it's Google Maps, it gives you the detail, but it tells you, I don't know about you, but I struggle sometimes when I'm following Google Maps, look down at the screen and you can't tell whether you're heading north or you're going in the right direction, whatever.
Absolutely.
I have to say Soundscape is so much better because it actually tells you, which way, to go and things like that. So it's a navigation tool. It's more of a sat nav, as you say, more of a kind of an audible Google Maps.
Okay.
It's like I'd say it was like a 3D Google Maps. Google Maps is 3D. A two-dimensional feedback, whereas Soundscape, it really fills in the world around you, and it really gives you that confidence to know that you're not going off on the wrong track, so to speak. Yes, it's fantastic.
So therefore, it's for everybody then, right? Not just for the visually impaired. Okay, and is it free?
Yes, it's free at the point of use. At the moment, it's free to download. You'll get it in the App Store if you search for Soundscape.
Right.
But it has to be paid for. I mean, I think this is one of the challenges. The hosting, we don't charge for our input to it, but there are hosting costs, involved in maintaining these apps and keeping. Yeah,
but for the user, it's free at the moment. Yeah. Absolutely. For the end user.
Yes.
And Kris,
and it will stay free for the end user. We do not. There's absolutely no plan to make it chargeable.
And Kris, I remember from your presentation last month where you mentioned a number of tools. Unfortunately, many of those tools are quite expensive, right? They're in the thousands. So I think it's definitely, there's a lot of, I think there needs to be a lot of noise made about at least, a technology, a solution like this where, a lot of people may not be aware of, right? So I think, doing this webinar is useful to help to socialize what people should know about this. So thank you for doing that, yeah? This is amazing. And Kirsty, what's the next step? I know you've been very busy, heads down just trying to get this step one down. What is your next step?
Well, the next step is to develop the roadmap. So there are kind of two elements to this. Developing the app is one thing, but paying for it is the other. And what I'm working on at the moment is a funding framework, whereby we can engage with the charities that exist within the visually impaired community to fund the cost of the hosting costs. And we want to do it in such a way that no one organization shoulders the burden, because it also means that no one organization gets to decide what happens with the app. And I think if the app is ever to be switched off again, it's because the visually impaired community has said it doesn't want it, and that things have moved on. So that's one side of it at the moment, is my engagement, in that context. But actually, the roadmap is it's about how do you integrate things like door detection into the app, so that when you arrive at a door, whether it's a fire exit or whether you should push it or pull it, which is that next sort of step in terms of the independence and ability there. And also we had the people that are actually using it, we're explicitly asking them for feedback on what would make it better and what's missing. You know, Lynn, in the chat there, she's sort of saying, is there something that would allow you to navigate along a railway carriage and things like that? You know, there are things like Seeing AI helps you to kind of identify whether there's identify whether there's an empty seat in a bus and things like that, or, you know, you can engage with somebody at the other end of your app to tell you what's available. It's a case of not reinventing the wheel. It's actually about maybe integrating technology that's already out there and folding it into a Soundscape at the same time. So,
Kris, how widely known is this solution to the visually impaired community, in your opinion?
I think the message is getting out there. As Kirsty said, it's Microsoft's version was around for about 7 years. So in my experience, the younger generation, who are obviously far more tech savvy, have found Soundscape, and they were quite dismayed at the thought of it going away. So it's been fantastic that it's been saved. But for the wider community, there's still a need for the message to get out there. It's one of those things I think you really need to try. It's something that it can be a bit intimidating, like any technology, the first time you use it. So my goal is to demystify and show people how user-friendly it truly is. To me, Soundscape is above and beyond most navigational tools, purely because it's the feedback is so immediate. It does feel so natural. I mean, as you heard with the example, there's almost a heartbeat going on, the sonar in the background, as well as the beep when you're facing the right way, whichever beacon you've set, wherever it is you want to go. So there's that immediate feedback, but it can be quite a sensory overload to begin with. So it's getting people, getting the message out there. The younger generations, I think, have pretty much embraced it, but it's the older generations with most tech, it's trying to show them how simple it is. That's the hardest part.
Yeah. I'm just conscious of time. And I just want to also share some of my personal learnings. I think one thing that I've learned in terms of coming into this digital inclusion space is that, you know, in the past, I assumed that everybody knows how to use technology. So I never sort of considered those who couldn't for any reason. And then recently, as a result of being part of the Digital Poverty Alliance, you know, I learned about the importance of providing support to people who need them. But what I've learned today from you is that it's more than just support, right? Because you talk about role models, you being a role model, right? We need more role models out there, right? So that's the second thing that I learned, and I'm trying to absorb that and see how I can then share the message out. But there's also a third thing that you mentioned about the fact that if you are able to be a role model and support those, it is a form of empowerment, right? And I think this is where the human conditions is so fragile, because many of us suffers from a lack of confidence or motivation or whatever reasons. And how do we find a way to support those people who actually, it's not about the technology, it's about that other softer element that is very hard. And I think this is where you talking about being a role model, not just today, but, you know, in the job that you do. And that's the reason why we organize this webinar, is to help to get a message out there, to hear from people like yourself, because it's so much more powerful to hear from people who's been through this than the rest of us who trying to tell people, because nobody listens to each other that well, right? So thank you, both of you. Yeah, Kris, sorry.
Oh no, I was just to say thank you. I mean, I agree that representation is a big thing. It's one thing that is missing. I mean, I think I don't particularly want to advertise the BBC necessarily, but I think everybody remembers Rosie, who was on Strictly Come Dancing, who was had hearing impairment, and the impact that she had.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have that same immediate representation in the world at large. But I deal with people with many different ailments, you know, visual impairment being the primary one, which is what I focus on. But it's often just one of many different ailments that people are going through. And what strikes me is that we all feel the same. We all have insecurities. We all have self-doubt, self-reliance issues. It's not purely something that's visual based, if you like. I spend my life trying to remove the visually impaired person and put the person first. It's very easy just to see somebody as a disabled person, as somebody with a restriction. I just try to flip that and show people that no, you know, I'm just like you. I may do things slightly differently. I might do things slightly better. God forbid. But
Yeah.
you know, we are all human at the end of the day, and all any of us want is those human givens, you know, to
Okay.
feel that we belong, to have agency and status and relationships. Yeah.
Thank you. Listen, we're on the hour now, so if I may sort of draw this to a close, I'll hand over to Margaret in a moment just to say a few words. But Kris, thank you. You've been an inspiration to many of us today. And Kirsty, you know, thank you for doing what you and Scottish Tech Army for doing what you can to do something about this such an important technology that is free for end users. So let's find a way to really get this message out there. So thank you, Margaret. Over to you. You're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is brilliant. I think what we'd actually like to do is actually ask everybody to unmute themselves or go on to reactions so we can actually show our appreciation because it was absolutely wonderful. Thank you both very much.